Moving now on to Barret, who prevails as one of the most impulsive and headstrong members of the party. He's the classic secondary character who begins as a guide and leader and later steps into the background as a hero, takes centre stage. Barret is great at propelling the story and agenda forward because he's frequently outspoken about how Shinra are destroying the planet and making things worse for people. And it's these outbursts that consistently set the tone of the antagonism between the party and the Shinra early in the game. The interesting thing about Barret and these outbursts, however, is when things take a turn into his own past, we find that things aren't all that they seem. Rather than being an eco-warrior who cares about the live stream, Barret is using this agenda to wage his personal vendetta against the Shinra, who, it turns out, destroyed his town, his livelihood, and killed his wife, which they did in a response to a suspected sabotage of the newly built coral reactor. We also discover in the desert prison that even Marlene, who Barret refers to throughout the game as his daughter, is biologically his best friend's, the character of Dine, who is revealed to be alive, but mentally and physically damaged from the events that took place at Coral. And he's essentially just become an extremely nihilistic individual who we have to fight and who eventually commits suicide in despair. So whether you find Barret annoying or amusing at the beginning of the game, we do eventually see a glimpse of these traumatic events that inform his character and permanently changed his personality to become how it is. And rather than being a brute with a humorous juxtaposing soft spot for his daughter, we see a man carrying a weighty guilt around with him, and Marlene is the avatar of his regrets and the focus of what he hopes will be his redemption, by successfully raising her. And by comparison, Shinra become the focal point for his rage, and where his negative emotions are, always channeled throughout the story. So for my part, I think Barret's story is an interesting one, both in terms of his societal conditions and the friendship-turned-feud he has with Dine. The status of Barret being a coal miner who finds his profession redundant due to new technologies is reminiscent, personally I find it reminiscent of the Great Britain in the 1980s with the closure of the coal mine industry by Margaret Thatcher. And these are events which even today account for a considerable unemployment in Wales and parts of England, and this is exactly how we find the town of Coral in the contemporary events of the game. Like the inhabitants of the slums living in the shadow of Midgar, so too do the inhabitants of Coral live in the shadow of the Gold Saucer. So in both instances there's a geographical juxtaposition between the wealthy elites and their carefree lifestyle, those kind of actually tangibly suffering for them to be able to, obtain that. As for Dine, I think this friendship-turned-feud was a great twist for Barret's backstory, and my only criticism is that Dine didn't last longer in the game. However, having said that, I'm appreciative that with frequent run-ins with the Turks and other kind of tertiary antagonists, there wasn't much room to include yet another nemesis to kind of frequently kind of recur throughout the game.